we read a lot on LinkedIn and think that, hey, people are just going to eat off our hand, right? There's going to be huge demand and it's going to eat off our hand. But that was not so in the category that we were representing. So it required a lot of patience to set up an engine for acquiring leads and then eventually customers. So the time that we spent between 2020, early, let's say late 2019 to early 2020, to say how do we set up inbound as an engine? And that was very essential because until we set that up, we were not able to gauge demand. So what we said was, okay, what do we do now?
Welcome, Vidya, to Everyday Leadership. As you all know, that Everyday Leadership is a place where we try to curate content from founders who are in the trenches and doing all the heavy lifting. Our today's guest is Vidya Santhanam. She is the co-founder and CEO of Fitbots. So it's a very interesting startup where she is trying to automate OKRs and help companies, really build focus in their execution. With that high level context, so I'll let Vidya introduce herself. So Vidya, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself? Just give us a context in terms of how did you end up where you are today?
Thank you, Pradeep. It's a pleasure to be here as part of Everyday Leadership. Hi, everyone. My name is Vidya. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Fitbots. Fitbots is a software for OKRs. So what we do is we're really solving the problem of how teams come together to drive high velocity business outcomes. And the way to do that is through a strategy execution framework called objectives and key results. For those who are new to OKRs, it's a very versatile framework. It can actually be applied both in your personal as well as in your professional lives. What we've done is we've actually made a SaaS offering out of it. Prior to Fitbots, I used to lead leadership in talent management for a billion-dollar company named Mindtree, and that's where the passion for OKRs also started.
Uh, why did you think that OKRs is an idea? Why did you think that there is some business that you can really capture by automating OKRs?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll probably go back about 6 years in time. So that's when we set up Fitbots. This was in 2018. Came away from the warmth of
Hmm.
the herd, wanted to set up my own startup. Went into the trenches, as you rightly called out, Pradeep, and said that, hey, let's build something to actually solve the problem of career fitness, right? That's how the word Fitbots actually came about. So the initial problem statement that we set out to solve, both me and my co-founder, was employees and companies want a sense of purpose. They want movement in their careers, but sometimes they don't know whom to go to. Right? There are no career coaches which are available at scale. So we said, hey, can we have software actually bubble up? I'm sorry, double up as career coaches, and that's where the idea actually started. So the initial version of Fitbots was a very different problem statement and a very different solution. How we got started is I came out of my corporate career, had made a list of all chief human resource officers who were there part of my network, and started doing a lot of user interviews to find out, hey, what's the real problem when it comes to movement of employees, when it comes to internal career management. And then realized that some of the nuances of that were, well, it's a problem, but it may not be a burning necessity right away to get solved by software. Probably it's a problem which may come up, let's say, a few years down the line. So we really didn't get a clear answer to it. At the same time, we'd already started building our first version of the software, because when I went in for user interviews, they wanted to actually see how is software really solving the problem. So it was really a chicken and egg situation where you're doing your user study, but at the same time, they want to see some kind of a proof on how it's going to be solved. So we built an initial version, took it to a few of those customers, or sorry, to a few of the folks whom we were speaking with, and thought we could probably run a POC with them. So to your question, how did we get started? So our first customer actually came from that list of 100, where we looked at, hey, out of the list of 100, who would be an actual early adopter, not only give us user feedback, but also to actually run a POC in their company. And we zoned in on a product company, a CHRO for product company, which was there for about 20, 25 years. It was in the revenue assurance space, came over and said that, hey, you can run a POC in my company. So the initial first customer was actually a relationship sale.
No, that is very interesting. So you touched upon customer interviews, and can you sort of is strategy generally in the company, is it done by chief of staffs of CEOs, or is it generally the HR people who run the strategies in the companies?
Yeah. So actually, that's a good segue into uh, the part two of my response, which is around how do we really iterate into the strategy execution space. So initially, the problem statement, the solution was very focused on human resources. And then when we made the first version of our software, which was in career fitness, we realized that hey, users actually didn't come back to the product. Right? There was no real problem solution fit out there. So we said, okay, there's something wrong again. So let's talk to real users. So we're not talking to the buyers, but we're actually talking to real users. So we went back to the folks who were actually using, who were supposed to use the software, and said that, hey, why are you not coming back to it? Right? So the responses were very evident that many of them felt that the work that they were doing, they were not really able to draw a connection to the company mission or vision, right? And they were actually running tasks, but they weren't sure as to where they were headed. So then we iterated this entire product into, hey, OKRs could be the real gap, the real solution to bridge that gap between what the employee is, kind of doing on a day-to-day basis to what the business outcomes should be. So that's how we iterated to the product, and that's where the buyer persona, to your question, Pradeep, started changing. And we realized that at the same time, there was this bestseller called Measure What Matters, which was launched in the market. And every venture capitalist was actually recommending their book to portfolio founders. CEOs were actually buying the book or recommending it to their peers. And then we noticed that that book actually did a lot of our selling. And then founders started coming to us much later. This was a little later after the first three customers, where they started asking us as to, hey, can you help us set up OKRs for our company? So that's the broad shift from where we started with a very different problem, very different solution, iterated our product to OKRs, and then we realized that hey, there's a market for this.
Nice. That is very interesting. And yeah, measure what matters. I think that's one of the books that really helped Google, I think, set up OKRs and get a lot of success from the framework. Um, before we sort of continue with this, so let's step back and understand the customer interviews part of it. So was, when you look back, were the customer interviews really helpful, or obviously the iteration based on the user feedback, nothing beats it. But was customer just, can you just give us a sense about how the customer interviews were, and were they really helpful, and what did you really draw from that?
Yeah, so I must say that I was quite a novice in doing the customer interview initially. Because as a
Hmm.
founder, you're not trained to do a customer interview, and many of those skills is something that you're acquiring. So the initial set of questions, if I recollect, were more about, hey, how do employees in your company manage their careers, and what kind of practices are around it. So we found that many of them were sharing the practices which were in the future or about the big gaps that they had. So we realized that probably the way we had structured the customer discovery calls were not really serving the purpose. But that changed when we did user interviews. So with users, we were asking them very specific questions, like, what about the product didn't you like? What about the product did you actually? What were you expecting as soon as you signed up? Right? So, what are some of the initial challenges that are there when it comes to, let's say, your task versus your outcome? So we started making it very specific, and we learned along the way. So, personally, I found a lot more kind of outcomes when I did the user interview rather than the buyer interview.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And and when you wanted to automate this, and when you thought the OKR is the right thing to go after, tell us a bit about market research. I'm sure, I mean, I did some research on my end. It looks like, there were some companies like Ally.ai. It looks like
Yes.
got acquired by Microsoft, which was very interesting. And there are other companies like Quantiv and a couple other companies. So given that there are already some big players in the market, So can you give us some, just help us understand why did you think you can still acquire some business here, and what did you better?
Yeah. So it's a great question. We were actually happy that there was competition because it's also a validation that, yeah, there's demand for this software. And we launched in Asia. So we built a software for Asia Pacific. The category was fairly new. There were very few companies which actually knew about OKRs. So we realized that we had probably a lot more heavy lifting to do than, let's say, in the North American market. So we took that as an opportunity. We said that, okay, we said to ourselves, okay, we're building the software from Asia. Can we build it for Asia? We know that the journey is going to be longer, but we could probably be the first to set up this category. So that's how we actually thought about the problem as well as the solution. So what we did was, back to your question on, how did we know it's a big bet? We probably didn't do a very good deep dive into the market at that point of time. But if I were to do it again at this time, I would probably do three things. One is go to G2 and look up the grid, right? And see for strategy execution how many software providers are out there. Because it's a good validation of, hey, what's my competition like? The second thing I would probably do is to go into Google Trends and then search for how many people are looking for OKR software, right? And that gives you a clear indication of search volume. And search volume has, of course, got a direct correlation to demand. And I think the third thing I would also do is, what are the trends out there? Why are people adopting OKRs? Right? How are they being referred to others? Why are some folks being referred to others for requiring an OKR software? So the small data analysis is something I would probably have done better rather than getting into directly the TAM. The TAM comes probably it's probably a lot more away from reality is what we felt. So if we had done this differently, probably we would have gone faster into market. But we looked at, hey, how many inquiries are coming into us through referrals. So those were some of the initial metrics that we were tracking, saying that, hey, are we being referred from one company to another? So it was, I would say it was pretty rudimentary as a founder, but if I were to do it again, I would have been, I'll probably be a lot more smarter.
No, yeah, that totally makes sense. And so now that you know OKR is the one to go after, and what was your go-to market strategy? Like, did
Yeah.
you want it to start on the top, or did you want to go from the bottom, or and what markets did you want to go after? SMBs? How did you strategize with the go-to market side of it?
Yeah. I would say we actually built this plane as it was flying. So the initial year, so I'll talk about year 0 to 1. So 2019, April of 2019 is when we actually had the first version of the OKR software. And that's where we started, speaking to people saying that, hey, we've got the software, there's it's a strategy execution software, and it bridges the gap between tasks and outcomes and a whole lot of benefits around OKRs. And then we realized that since the category was extremely new in Asia Pacific, there were very few companies which were actually practicing OKRs. We had to get early adopters. So customer 1 to 3 happened through referrals. So we made a list of folks and asked them as to whether they would know companies who are interested in OKRs. And then we realized that accelerators and VCs were the ones who were propagating OKRs the most. So a couple of their portfolio founders were referred to us for implementing OKRs. But then we realized that there's another problem out there. And going back to your question, we were actually a top-down sales motion. We did not have a product led, so we had no free trial on our website at that point of time. So the only way they could actually come over to us is, let's say somebody refers us and then we give them a demo and then we take them through the process. But then we realized we hit another roadblock. So OKRs as a category is very similar to what Agile was, let's say many years ago, like a couple of decades ago, where you had Agile coaches who preceded software. And that's where we realized that software alone cannot solve the buyer problem. It's not software as a service, but it's software with a service. So we had to introduce this entire service of OKR coaching along with the software so that we're able to solve the buyer problem. And that's why we had to very, very intently listen to buyers to say that, hey, don't. So they started telling us, don't just sell us the software, tell us how to implement OKRs correctly. So actually, that was a moment of reckoning for us. And it was also a turning point for Fitbots, where we said that, hey, do we go traditional SaaS? Do we do what every other SaaS company is doing and just push our software? But that's not going to give us customer value or give our customers value. Or should we introduce software with a service? So we took that as an opportunity. My co-founder and I got certified as OKR coaches. We partnered with a leading OKR training company in the US called OKRstraining.com. And we brought certifications and coaching on OKRs to Asia Pacific. So we started establishing the brand of being the first mover in OKR training and coaching along with software in the Asia Pacific region. So this was, I'm talking about early 2020. So when a buyer then came to us, they would take the software and we would say that, hey, if you need help in implementing OKRs correctly, we'll coach you as well. Right? So the entire coaching or onboarding experience along with the certified OKR expert is what we started pushing along with the software. That really was a important, I think, point of our business.
No, that is super interesting, and yeah, I think this looks the entire OKR trend looks very similar to how Agile got adopted, because Agile, you can see where it is now, right? And uh, so, did you and having to introduce coaches with the software, does it not introduce any scalability problems there, or uh, is that I mean, did you know some companies that have already scaled with that approach, or what was your thinking behind having to deal with a human being now providing a service with the software?
I'll probably go back to YC and what Paul Graham says. And says, initially you'll have to do things which are not scalable. And that's exactly what we did. So a couple of things that we did was initially my co-founder and I started coaching companies along with the software because we wanted to really understand as to what are people using, what are some problems when it comes to OKR implementation. And then we took that experience and we started certifying a network. We've got a network today of about 650 plus practitioners. They're both internally certified OKR experts in the company, as well as coaches who are part of our affiliate network. So let's say tomorrow or today a company comes over to us. There's a coach who can be, kind of booked through our network as well as along with the software. So there are ways that we figured out to scale it. But the initial few customers, we did want to coach ourselves in order to learn from the experience of being in the trenches and then building a software which people actually like.
In a way, a great way to warm up leads as well, because now you know the customer's problem, and slowly you can introduce your solution. I think, in my opinion, that's a great way to warm up leads. Uh, uh, so tell me one thing. So what is what are some problems that that you're seeing right now? I mean, is I've worked at some companies where OKRs were more like set and forget, and in many cases, I've seen companies run the entire show using documents where you have some OKRs written, and then every team would pitch in. They talk about their initiatives, and then you have to keep track of all of this manually. So there is that hassle as well. But how did you? What sort of helped you get the adoption with OKRs, especially from employees, right? So just talk about product adoption and some of your learnings there.
I think I'll probably respond to this question with a deep reflection on the ICP. So, customer 1 to 3 we acquired through relationship selling and then realized that that's not a scalable process. So that's where the importance of ICP and the setting up of inbound as a channel was deeply thought through. And we got help from a very committed accelerator called the Upeka SaaS Accelerator. So there are two learnings there. Uh, Asia Pacific, top down sales, fairly new category, very few competitors, but there is a market out there. And we're trying to now acquire customers. So this entire journey, actually, initially the emotion that we went through is that it's not a rocket ship; it's a slugfest. right? And the reason why I wanted to share this is because many times when startups are set, we read a lot on LinkedIn and think that, hey, people are just going to eat off our hand, right? There's going to be huge demand and it's going to eat off our hand. But that was not so in the category that we were representing. So it required a lot of patience to set up an engine for acquiring leads and then eventually customers. So the time that we spent between 2020, early, let's say late 2019 to early 2020, say how do we set up inbound as an engine?
Hmm.
And that was very essential because until we set that up, we were not able to gauge demand. So what we said was, okay, what do we do now, right? Like, and how do we really write our first blog? So we started interviewing founders. So much like what you're running as a podcast, we started interviewing founders who were actually running OKRs for their companies, asking them very similar questions like what you have is how did you get started? What are some of your implementation challenges? And tell us more about it and what would you recommend to other founders? And we started converting them into blogs and then publishing them and then distributing the blogs. We saw that with that, there was inbound interest which started coming in to say that, hey, I've read your blog and it seems really interesting. Could you tell us more? From blogs, we went on to ebooks. So I remember in somewhere in 2020, we said that, okay, let's publish an ebook, which is called the ABCs of OKRs. Because it seems like many people are new to it, so they may want to learn more about it. So let's just make it into a very, very practitioner-led ebook. It's still there on our website, but that actually got us about, in the first week of launch, we got about 100 leads which came into us. 100 so I would say they're not marketing qualified leads as such, but they were probably subscribers who were interested in OKRs. We said that, hey, when we've got 100 of them, that means there is demand for this. So it was a moment of joy. So the emotion that we went through was, we thumped the table and said that, okay, we're building something in a category which actually has demand. And I still remember the smile on the face of the person who wrote the ebook. She's a very capable coach who's now still part of our network. Said that, hey, there is a space for OKRs. So that was so. Back to your question on go to market. Go to market, we wedged it on scale ups, which are venture funded companies, which typically have members about 50 to 100 members or beyond. Founders are keen on OKRs. They've read the Measure What Matters book. That's a trump card for us when it came to leads coming in. So the founder has read the book, is a VC funded company or maybe a profitable bootstrap company. That's absolutely correct, fine, and coming into us to help them implement OKRs. So when we found that the people size is about 50 and beyond, that's where the need for a software also came in. So going back to your question, the GTM was clearly, the channel was inbound. And the second is we looked for companies where there was velocity of the business so that there was also a space or a budget for software.
I see. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I have one question about the idea for this product, and then we'll launch ourselves into more of the sales and customers and learnings. Um, when you wanted to go to market, so how did you ensure that OKRs is the only focus? Like, did you not think this is too lightweight to sell? Did you not want to add more things to it? Maybe horizontal products, like add some performance management to it, or something at the front, or also offer strategy solution or something like that. You can add more things to it, or you can keep it extremely focused, because a lot of the giants like the Workday or these companies, they also sell OKR as a module, right? So OKR is still part of what they sell, maybe one of those small apps from their big menu of offerings. So what was your thinking behind keeping it super focused?
Yeah, and it's a trade-off. And we chose to be focused. We said that the hypothesis was the riches are in the niches. So why not build a software which is very, very focused on the OKRs market? So we started seeing traction on both software with the coaching and certifications that we had. Said, okay, can we build that and then take it to a certain point and then add on the performance and let's say the other modules which are there. So that was a initial thought process. Had we had more resources, we probably may
Hmm.
have built another module faster, but we had to make the choice to say that, hey, we probably need to stay a lot more focused before stretching ourselves too thin. But even within OKRs, we found that there were multiple use cases, because selling to, let's say, a scale up, and then we started seeing some kind of an interest from larger enterprises. And then one of the early mistakes that we made was, okay, can we service an enterprise along with a scale up? And then we started stretching ourselves thin, because the kind of requests which started coming into the product roadmap, the need for more integrations from enterprises actually stretched us quite thin. So in hindsight, there's this trade-off between being focused and building more, and also the choice of the segment. Right? So those are some of the learnings that we had as we went through the journey.
Nice. And how did you fund the first iteration of this product, Vidya? Did you fund yourself, or did you have an investor from the early from the time you started on this in 2019?
For the first 2 years, we were bootstrapped.
Hmm.
We put in, so the founders, as founders, we put in our own money. And then we didn't do a friends and family round. We actually got a grant. We won a competition and won a grant. So with customer capital, so we made money early. So we never sold our software for free, as well as the grant and the money that we put in. We actually made it to 2 years. And after that, we raised a pre-seed round and then took it to the next stage.
Awesome. And also talk a bit about your first three customers, like the ones that came through referrals. What was the experience like? And I'm not sure if you sold anything before, but just give us a sense about those first early customers, and how did you went on to deal with the other customers from there.
So I came from no sales background. So initially I thought that was a disadvantage. And over time I realized that probably that's my biggest advantage, because I didn't want to sell and I wanted the buyer to come over and buy from us. So the mindset shifted. So initially we said that, hey, we're solving your problem, and you want to run OKRs correctly. So if you want to implement OKRs well, come to us, because we understand this. We're experts at it. We've got certified folks. We'll help you solve it. So that was the approach. So we really didn't push the software. But of course, this was a learning process over time. To answer your question on the first three customers, the customers were, again, the persona was in the ICP that we had selected. In both the companies, one of the nuances that we found is the founders were involved in the OKR implementation. So that insight that we got early helped us target content better to the buyer. So we started creating content which is very focused on founders coming to us, placing an inquiry, or nudging their, let's say, chief of staff or HR leader to place an inquiry, and then take them through the sale process.
I see. Very interesting. So, I told a bunch of my founder friends that I'm, about this podcast that I'm doing with you. And one of the questions that came from one of them was, hey, I mean, we recently adopted OKRs, but, let's say if there is an OKR, I mean, where, I have this sales team, which is bringing in new leads, but then I have a retention team, which is supposed to, have some a certain metric. How do you deal with these cross departmental OKRs where, or should we, does it make sense? Like, he has a problem trying to really create an OKR where one team is dependent on another team in a completely different department.
I think going back to the essence of OKRs, it's exactly what you mentioned. It's basically a silo buster, right? It gets cross-functional teams together to solve a problem. So the way to kind of look at OKRs is that it doesn't mirror org hierarchies or structures. So it's not about product and engineering writing their OKRs and sales writing their OKRs and marketing writing their OKRs. It's not about that. So let's say a company is trying to, let's say, reduce churn from 20% to 8%. That's the big problem, or the metric that we're trying to solve together. You can actually get a cross-functional team called a squad together, which is, let's say you call them churn busters. Churn busters has a representation of product and engineering, customer success, marketing, who come together and then say that, hey, how do we now cross-functionally reduce the problem of churn from 20% to 8%? So when the diverse team members come together, that's when the beauty of the framework starts coming alive. To answer your question, actually, the best way to set OKRs is to bring them all together, and to look at which business metric are you solving collectively.
Nice. And what's the trend in the market right now? So are more and more companies adopting? Okay, where do you think the state of the market is? Because this is a new concept for many people. Is it also industry agnostic? Like, is it only mostly the software companies that have adopted this just like agile, or are there other industries that are also adopting this as a framework?
Over time, we notice that there are dominant player industries which come to us. So, technology, banking and financial services, retail. This is where we see the highest demand for OKRs. It's not to say that other segments are not requesting it, but this is where there's probably a higher demand as we perceive. To answer your question, what's the future of OKRs? Well, goals will never go out of style as long as there are companies, as long as there are people who are running companies. Everybody needs goals. OKRs is about goals, but about audacious goals. So you'll always have OKRs. Maybe the form of OKRs could change. Maybe it'll be called something different, but the essence of it, which will continue there. And then software would, of course, be a lot more malleable, right, to kind of take that shape as we move forward.
Nice. And we're almost at the end of the pod, Vidya. So, but if you were to go back and do a few things differently, so what would that be now that you've spent about 4 or 5 years on this?
I would say that spend immense amount of time in understanding the problem before jumping into the solution, because we would have probably saved about 6 months of our initial very, very precious time in not building probably an MVP, taking it to users and then figuring out that's not really solving the problem and then going back to the drawing board. So that process of iteration can probably be avoided if we do very, very stringent customer discovery interviews. So I would probably change that. The second is keep an eye on the demand for your category. Because especially in SaaS, if there's probably muted demand, then as I mentioned, it'll become a slugfest over years, and that's not a good sign. Founders can probably burn out. So I'll probably do those differently. Immense amount of time on the problem, and very, very keenly look at whether there's a demand for the category.
And do you have any tools that you would like to recommend to other founders, that they can employ?
So I would say I'll probably go old school. I'll still look at I'll still look at internet searches. I'll go to G2. I'll do my study, or let's say any other marketplace out there which has listed software. Go to Google Trends. Look at what's the search volume. Go to probably SEO tools and look at, hey, what kind of what kind of blogs are ranking up of competitors. So do a very external in or an outward in kind of analysis before building, before even writing a single line of code, I would say.
Nice. And that's one thing that founders find it very hard to unlearn, because they have always this itch to think about the product first and not the problem first. They're always thinking in their mind, "So how do I build this?" And that requires a lot of unlearning. But and I know you're up against a lot of the people who've raised millions and millions of dollars. So what's your plan there? How do you plan on tackling them from here?
Yeah, I think we probably have to be honest to whether we're building customer value and then continue scaling our channels. Some of our channels currently are working, so we'll continue pressing the pedal on that, and then we'll see where this goes.
Nice. But are you raising any money for your startup now, or
Not at the moment.
not at the moment? Nice.
Yeah.
And any recommendation of a good book for the founders?
Yeah, I would highly recommend Traction. That's a excellent read. The second one I would probably recommend is not because we're an OKR company, but the Measure What Matters book is a real eye opener, especially when it comes to your mission and the importance of mission and vision, right? And how do you really communicate it? These are definitely two on top of my list.
Awesome. That's a great pod. Thank you for being here, Vidya. There was a lot of learning, and really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing all your lessons. For the aspiring founders, we really thank you, and thank you for being on this pod.
Thank you, Pradeep. It was a pleasure being here and sharing our learnings. I hope it's valuable, and thank you to all the listeners.
Thank you.